You know, niggas gotta get their priorities together. Got their mind on the wrong things, spending their money in the wrong way.
Trapaholics, real trap shit.
Say you need that car with the rims and a trunk, just like Jim. It's more to life. Yeah.
I'm telling you. Talk to him.
Say you need that LV bag with the belt and the hat.
That's all you got though.
It's more to life. Yeah.
Talk to him. Real.
Say you wanna turn up at the club, light some bottles, impress them girls. It's more to life.
The whole fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And I'm Ethan, and who dat? And we're back with some main course. And man, we got a lot on our plate this evening. And I guess the first thing I want to get into is probably the main thing people started their week out on, and that was the Michael Thomas injury. And if you've been following my podcast now for, I guess, a little bit over a month or so now, maybe you've kind of figured out by now, I really haven't talked much about Michael Thomas, and this might kind of be why, is because I'm not really sold on his return yet, and I don't really want to be like tooting my own horn or anything about his injury. I'm obviously I'm not happy that he's hurt. I'm actually upset about it, just like any other Saints fan, because I just like any other fan or podcaster or analyst or sports writer or just Saints follower. I was starting to get juiced up just like everyone else. Seeing him in practice and hearing that he looked like the best Saints receiver in practice, and looking like every quarterback in training camps #1 receiver. But like I said, I wasn't on most of my podcasts and stuff. I really wasn't talking about him much, and I kind of put it out there that until I kind of see in either like a preseason game or even a regular season game, until I kind of see can't guard Mike, who we all know about, again, go out there and do his thing, 10 catches, 100 yards and a touchdown, like we all know. I'm not gonna be like, oh, he's back, because right when we start billing him up like that, then I don't know where he's got a hamstring injury, but from reports that we're hearing, supposedly it's not serious, but like we heard back almost going on 2 years ago, the initial indication about his ankle injury is that it was going to be 4 to 6 weeks, and we know how that saga played out, and so. Hopefully it isn't anything serious, but you know how any kind of injury can go from nothing to obviously a year-long deal, and definitely with hamstrings are nothing to play around with, and a player like Michael Thomas or Demario Davis or Cam Jordan, that they can go from being an Iron Man, never hurt ever, and then they get up into that age range where they're 29, 30, into their late 30s, and then those injuries start happening, and then they're just kind of nonstop. And let's hope that's not Michael Thomas. Let's hope that's not the issue with him. Hopefully he just has this one little blip on his recovery here, and hopefully they're just being cautious with him with his return and his training camp recovery and stuff, and they're just trying to protect him for the start of the regular season, and this is kind of just a way to avoid people pressuring him to play in the preseason, and hopefully we see him week one and don't really have to worry. And maybe we'll hear some more about him uh, later on in training camp. But I definitely, I think this is pretty fair to say we won't be seeing him Friday night. But and also I wanted to before I forget, it's always weird with things like this because I was riding a high because I also do some podcasts about UFC and things. So I was so excited about how that went off, and then this comes out on Sunday. So my weekend had been going pretty good, and then you hear this because they were having practice on Sunday, and this kind of spoiled it a little bit. But sometimes these injuries come out, and it's like, how did he even get hurt? Because he didn't even play in the game on Friday. So it's like, well, how did he even get hurt? I understand these players, they practice and they work out on their own and they have their own trainers and stuff. But man, that's one of the most annoying things. He just pops up on the injury report and you don't even know how it happened. But that, I guess that's all I have to say about that subject. But the next subject I got is Kirk Merritt. It looks like they're really pushing for this guy to make the team. Obviously, we saw him have that big 59-yard kickoff return in the game against Green Bay, and then he had some iffy kind of. They threw him a couple deep balls later on in that game. One he just kind of outright dropped, and then the other one was a diving attempt that looked like it was kind of overthrown by Ian Book, but he, it's one of those ones where it hits your hands, so you can argue if it hits your hands, you could have, maybe you should have caught it, but still it was overthrown by Ian Book. But it looks like they're moving you to a different position, running back. They obviously came to him and were like, if you'll change positions, we really want you to make the team. So they're trying him at running back now, which is pretty interesting. That they which maybe makes sense. He had two drops in the game at Green Bay, so maybe they think he'd be a better running back. And obviously he's explosive showed that he's pretty explosive with the 59-yard return. And this kind of transition to running back kind of reminds me of Raheem Mostert, kind of, a guy that was a kick returner, return specialist, a guy that really showed out in preseason and then became a real weapon for the 49ers. And then he also kind of reminds me of maybe the guy that actually played for the Saints the last couple of years, and Ty Montgomery, who was a wide receiver. And if he makes the team, it would be kind of interesting if Kirk Merritt makes the team and keeps his current number, because Ty Montgomery throughout his last couple seasons has been a special teams player and been a guy that's been taking carries out of the backfield, who's worn 88. So he's had a wide receiver number, but has played running back. So that would be kind of interesting if Kirk Merritt keeps his 85 and is taking running back snaps out of the backfield. And then also a very high profile player who I imagine Kirk Merritt would be phenomenal if Kirk Merritt ever gets on this guy's level. And probably, obviously, if he was on this level, he wouldn't be making this transition to running back. But Deebo Samuels is also a very great Pro Bowl wide receiver for the 49ers, is another wide receiver that hasn't transitioned to running back, but takes a lot of snaps out of that position. So that's what this kind of reminds me of. But all this translates to the Saints obviously like like Kirk Merritt, and they're obviously doing stuff to try to help him make this team. And I had mentioned before uh, that obviously with the big 59-yard kickoff return, if he doesn't outright make the Saints team, I don't think that he'll be able to. I don't think the Saints will be able to stash him on the practice squad. I think some other team will probably sign him, and he'll either be some other team's return man or backup return man. I think with an explosive play like that in the preseason, some other team will sign him. So that's just an interesting development with a player that we saw make a big play in the last preseason game. So on to the next thing, because man, you take some time off from the main course. You got a lot of stuff that starts piling up to eat now. So Jameis returned to practice, and when he first returned, he looked, from what I heard, he started looking kind of rusty, I guess is the term that they used. But after he knocked the rust off, they saying that he started looking pretty good, and they said he started actually scrambling around back there for the first few times in practice. So that's very encouraging, and made some great plays back there, and even the closeout practice. I think that was on. I want to say that was on Thursday, or it may have been Wednesday. I think I think it was Thursday. The closeout practice. He found let's see. No, that was Wednesday. He found Jarvis Landry in the back of the end zone with like a phenomenal like one-handed catch, like on fourth down, to get a touchdown to close out practice. So that making amazing plays like on fourth down, and that just sounds like he's making them great plays and just clutch plays and stuff that will translate to game situations. So sounds like he knocked off the rust, and he's really making relationships with his players, and especially key players like Jarvis Landry. And then it sounds like also in the press conference, it sounds like he would love to play in preseason. So that would be interesting. I'm kind of 50-50 on if I would actually want to see him do that, because just now coming back, it took about 2 weeks before he was able to come back from his little foot, ankle, toe injury, whatever you want to call it. And now he's just knocked the rust off. I think it would probably be safer if he didn't. But at the same time, the fan in me would love to see it. I'd love to see it. I'd be pumped to see it. But at the same time, it would be tragic if he re-injured his foot, or God forbid his knee. But I would be juice Landry, juiced up to see it. But then this is an interesting note about a possibility, maybe a little keyed in hint that maybe he will. But I saw that Ian Book's numbers had been on the amount of snaps and stuff that Ian Book had been getting were like way down. But every other quarterback numbers had been ramped up. So maybe that's a key that he will be playing a little bit in preseason, or maybe that's just an indicator that Ian Book is going to get cut. So yeah, I guess you take it how you want to, but which I could definitely see where it's just that they're done with giving Ian Book snaps and opportunities because he's about to get cut. I could definitely see it going either way with that, but it's definitely good to hear positive things about Jameis and him saying he feels good enough to play. And I definitely wouldn't think it would be bad if he did get out there and feel some live game action and maybe take one hit just before the season gets starts, but nothing too serious. But you damned if you do, damned if you don't in situations like that. All right, on to the next thing, and these next two things are kind of similar, a little cut and a little bit of trade here, and this goes back to kind of the the running back, just some depth and stuff, and this is one we talked about before probably, uh, and looking for a clone for for um, for uh, for uh, for Alvin Kamara, and uh, it it was more of a critical thing that we were concerned about when we thought Alvin Kamara was going to get suspended, but we're not as worried about that as we were earlier in training camp because uh, as far as we know, we don't think he's going to get suspended for any length of time. But anything could still happen, and we're not that confident about our third running back situation. It looks like Tony Jones so far has been the best running back after Mark Ingram, but he was the best. He was the number 2 running back last year before he hurt his ankle, and even before then. And when he came back, he wasn't really that impressive. So, are we that confident in Tony Jones Jr. making the team and being all that impressive if he makes the team this year? Not particularly, not really. So, if the Saints were able to get Kenyan Drake, would you like him to be signed? I think I would like the Saints to sign Kenyan Drake, but really, I mean, I think really when people think of Kenyan Drake, they think of his 2020 season when he was so good. And he did have amazing numbers that season. He played 15 games, had 955 yards, and really the number you look at is the 10 touchdowns he had, which is very comparable. You think of those numbers, and if you were to look at those numbers and to hide who he played for and hide the name, you'd be like, oh man, that's Alvin Kamara. And a lot of people think that, oh, Kenyan Drake, you would think that, oh, a lot of people think that, oh, he's like off-brand Best Buy, great value Alvin Kamara, but then you go to his receiving numbers. His receiving numbers weren't really that great that season because he only had like 31 targets and 25 receptions that year, and he had 0 touchdowns. So when I've heard a couple people say like, oh, if Alvin Kamara gets suspended or we need to trade for, this was back when people thought Alvin Kamara was going to get cut. So people were like, oh, we need to trade for Kenyan Drake because Kenyan Drake would be the perfect replacement for him. Like Kenyan Drake is not even close to being on the level of Alvin Kamara when it comes to being a receiver. Because like the most receiving yards that Kenyan Drake had ever had in a season was in 2018, and he played in 16 games that season, and he only had 53 catches for 477 yards and 5 touchdowns. Like that's not even close on Alvin Kamara's level, because Alvin Kamara, he's on Alvin Kamara's best season is like 80 catches, like 900 yards receiving. and like 5 touchdowns. Like that's not even. It's not even five touchdowns. It's not even comparable, you know. So I mean, the rushing yards are good. I'll give you that. The 10 touchdowns are impressive, but you know, now that he's a free agent, I'm very intrigued, but not really because of his receiving numbers. Like he's a good receiving back, but I was a little misled there too, that he was a great receiver. He's a good receiver, but not a great receiver. But like I said, uh, he, uh, he's a free agent now, and another thing, he was hurt last year too, and I think he was maybe misused um, a little bit in Oakland, maybe stuck behind Josh Jacobs, Abdullah, another running back that's there, because even though he played in 12 games last year, he only had 2 starts. That's probably because of Josh Jacobs being there. Uh, but I mean, he played in 12 games, so he missed 5 games, but still, he only had 254 yards rushing, but he had a good yards per carry average of 4.5 yards. But still, I mean, that's still close to a full season. But he ended up breaking his ankle towards the end of the year. So I mean, he's coming off a pretty severe injury. He's going to be 28 years old, but like I said, he's a free agent, so free is for me. If the Saints sign him, would I think that he's probably a better option than Tony Jones Jr.? Yes. So, like I said, free is for me, and if they sign him, I'd probably feel better than Tony Jones Jr. All right, on to the next thing. Like I said, I had some cuts and some trade opportunities, and this one is a little different than that. And this is just kind of a random. This kind of came out of nowhere, and this is a player. He's kind of out of the same ballpark as uh, Kenyan Drake, because Kenyan Drake played for Miami, and Mike Gesicki he currently plays for Miami. Kenyan Drake played for Oakland, Las Vegas last year, but Mike Gesicki he plays for Miami this year, or might play for them this year unless he gets traded, which sounds like they don't want to pay him. And he sounds like maybe he's a little disgruntled being under the under the under the franchise tag, and so and so there's been talks that he's on the trading block, and because he's under the franchise tag, and what I'd heard is that they want their tight ends to block better. That sounds a lot like the Saints back in 2014, 2015 with Jimmy Graham and the whole "are you a wide receiver or are you a tight end" situation, and that's just kind of comical. But would I want the Saints to trade for Mike Gesicki? I don't really know about that. Depends on what they give up for him, and when it comes down to a sign and trade thing, I'm not a huge fan of sign and trades, because man, when you have to give up something and then you have to sign a guy to a big contract, then that usually doesn't ever work out real good for the team that's trading and then signing a guy to a big contract. And honestly, Mike Gesicki, he's a good player, but he's not a great player, honestly, because I mean, even in 17 games, he only had 780 yards and only 2 touchdowns. Because I mean, when you think of a tight end, you think of a guy that's a red zone threat, a guy that's going to have 8 to double-digit touchdowns. I mean, it's not like he's Jimmy Graham or Travis Kelce or Darren Waller or George Kittle. Like, I mean, even if he just barely had 1,000 yards receiving, or You know, he only had 73 catches. If he even had 80 or something, or just 8 touchdowns, I'd be maybe even a little more enticing. We're talking about he played a full 17 games. He showed that he's durable. I mean, that's with an extra game. His stats just don't blow me away. And I guess people could argue, well, he, he played with Tua Tagovailoa. Well, you know what? You could say at the same time, well, we don't know 100% what our quarterback situation is going to be like for the whole year either, because we don't know how healthy Jameis is going to be, and who and if Jameis misses a few games, is Andy Dalton much better than Tua? I don't really think so. Probably not. So would I want to give up a third round pick or give up any young players to trade for him and then have to give him like 13, 14, 15 million a year to sign him? Not really, but just kind of like the Kenyan Drake thing. If they get him, would I be mad? Probably not. But just from a fan perspective, I probably wouldn't do it. But obviously, if they get him, he's definitely an upgrade over Adam Troutman and Juwan Johnson. So he would definitely make an already pretty impressive offense even better. So that's my opinion on that. And let's see here. Okay, and this probably is just some bonus, some bonus uh, coverage. And I haven't really delved too deep into this really. I think I got this just pulled up for just some comedic relief here. And this is Junior Gillette is suing the NFL and some commissioners and some GMs uh, for $300 million for supposedly blackballing him out of the league. And I think that's since 2017 he hasn't been able to get a job in the NFL, and he's because he played for the Washington Redskins in 2017, and they actually signed him in 2015 after he was cut by the New Orleans Saints, and and he hasn't had a job since 2017, and that was after he was, and I guess the Saints aren't one of the teams, the Saints GMs, Saints coaches, none of those teams has nothing to do with the Saints, which is pretty interesting. Which I think it really isn't interesting. It's not interesting because of him being he's belt man. Everyone knows about him being belt man, whipping people on the beach with the belt, and that's why he was suspended 2 games before he could play at all with Washington in 2015 because it was related to domestic abuse and all that. And then I'm surprised Washington even stuck with him before he even got to play in 2017 because that was you got to, even though he's as far, I don't know him personal, but just from looking at him from afar, he seems like a kind of a terrible person. If you've seen anything from him on Twitter, he seems I like I said, I don't know him personal, but he seems like let's say he's an interesting guy. But just from a player standpoint, he went through some struggles there and I'm surprised Washington stuck with him because in 2015 he comes back from his 2-game suspension and he tears his left Achilles, and then they actually stick with him. And then he comes back from that in 2016, and they had actually signed him to like a $3 million deal. And then he tears his left Achilles, and then they sign him to like veteran minimum or something like that. And then they actually sign him in 2017, and then they sign him to like another veteran minimum. then he plays in 2017, and actually that's funny because he actually plays against New Orleans in that season, and he gets two hits on Drew Brees. Didn't get actually a sack, but he actually got 2 hits on Drew Brees, and the Saints still won the game 31-34. But then in the offseason, I guess he had some. I think he wanted to. I think he thought he was going to get paid, even though he only had like 3 sacks that season. And then contract disputes and had a contract fallout, and then never ended up re-signing with them, and never signed with any team after that. And hell, with all the stuff he'd been through with injuries and domestic violence and the crazy belt incident that he had out there. If I was him, I'd have probably signed any contract I could have got. But he was only 30 at the time. He was still relatively young for an edge rusher, I guess. But and he's only, he's 34 now, which is pretty old. That's at the end of your career. But I guess he still thinks he could play and is getting blackballed. But I thought that was just an interesting nugget that came out about him. But if you've seen anything or follow him on Twitter, he's always complaining about the NFL and always saying he can still play, or he's always bad mouthing the Saints or talking bad about Drew Brees or Sean Payton, and then sometimes you'll see him running it back, crawfishing, saying, "Oh, how much I love the Saints," or "Oh, sign me up, I'm ready to play for the Saints." Like he's kind of a clown, honestly. He's living in his glory days. I mean, he kind of needs to let it go, and sometimes you just need to let it go with things like that, and take things in stride when it comes to those kind of things. But I thought that was just interesting that he still hasn't let that one go. He's definitely in pursuit of something, and hasn't let his glory days of playing in the NFL go. And I think the odds of him winning that lawsuit are slim to none. But I thought Saints fans and just NFL fans, if anyone's listening to that, would get a good laugh out of that. But anyways, I think that's all I got for you this evening. And with that, can I get a check, please?